Hello and welcome back to English class. Today the first thing that I need you to do is take out the vocab sheet you picked up on your way in. You're going to answer numbers 11 through 20. It's the same thing that we did last time, only different questions. Find the word from our vocab list that fits it best and answer them. You have 10 minutes to complete this. Go ahead and get started, and you can pause this video for 10 minutes. Alright, the next thing that we're going to do is restrictive clauses, and go ahead and get out your notebooks, open them to Grammar and Conventions. That'll be the last tab of your second book, and open to the next open page. You're going to take some notes on that really quick. Okay, go ahead and open your notebooks again to Grammar and Conventions. And really quick, before we get started on today's new item, I just want you to think, can you remember what we said about non-restrictive clauses? What do we know about them? Just keep this in your head for a second. How do we set off the punctuation? What words does it start with? And what was the purpose or the definition of a non-restrictive clause? Remember, it's set off by commas, starts with who, that, or which, and the purpose or definition was it adds extra info to the sentence. So, remembering that, today we're going to kind of look at a different kind of clause that's very similar but a slight bit different, okay? And when I show you this next slide, I want you to, again, consider the structure of these two sentences and what they have in common. So you're looking for types of words and punctuation. Knowing that it's similar to non-restrictive clause, but different, what might we notice that is similar but different? Take a couple seconds to try to figure it out for yourself. The first sentence says, he strayed away by himself from the watchers whom he had placed in ambush on the crest of the hill. From Saki, the Interlopers. The second one says, the strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded. Alright, you should have an idea, and now I'm going to do what I did last time and show you the parts that I want you to be paying the most attention to, okay? So, these are what we are going to call restrictive clauses. I want you to go ahead and title your page Restrictive Clauses. And now I want you to notice, what punctuation do we have in a restrictive clause? And what words do we see the restrictive clause starting with? It might even be a good idea for you to answer, what does it have in common with a non-restrictive clause, and how is it different? He strayed away by himself from the watchers whom he had placed in ambush on the crest of the hill. The strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded. Alright, so knowing what we know about non-restrictive and knowing what we see and what we can notice about restrictive, let's go ahead and plug this in. So the restrictive clause, the punctuation on it, there's a period at the end, but that's just because it's a sentence, right? Is there any different punctuation? It looks like here there's no comma. This one's stuck in the middle of it. So the punctuation looks like no extra punctuation. No commas, no nothing. And as far as the words that it could begin with, here we see it begins with whom. Here it begins with that. So you just stick those here. Whom, that, And if we remember, when we did non-restrictive clauses, we also had some that began with which. And if the other two are the same, who and that, then which is probably the same as well. All right. So then, what would be the difference in the purpose or definition of adding a restrictive clause to a sentence? So the purpose or definition of adding a restrictive clause to a sentence is to what purpose? He strayed away by himself from the watchers, whom he had placed in ambush on the crest of the hill. The strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded. So what I notice is that, again, it is adding more details to the sentence. Now, last time, we said that they were adding details that were not necessary, but here, do we lose any necessary information? He strayed away by himself from the watchers, whom he had placed in ambush on the crest of the hill. I think it's really important for us to know who these people are, otherwise it's really open out there kind of sentence. We don't really have any reference or context for who he's talking about. Or here, if we said the strip of precipitous woodland was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded. We don't know which one. We can't identify which one. So it adds more details to the sentence and specifies which one. Okay? So when we might add this to our writing, if you're writing an expository essay or a short answer response, would be if it's important for you to get specific. So if you're thinking in expository essays, your specific details come in the body paragraphs. So sometimes it might be a good idea for you to narrow down which specific category you're talking about, okay? And then that would be a great time for you to just pull out a restrictive clause and stick it in there. Awesome. Then I want you to do kind of what we did last time, and we're going to play with restrictive clauses, and I want you to write these on your own paper, okay? So here's my example. It says, the Magi, as you know, were wise men who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. O Henry, the gift of the Magi. So we're going to look for our beginner word, who, that, which, whom, and we see who over here. So that is our restrictive clause beginning. So now we're going to look down here at these 4 sentence pieces and figure out what order we should rearrange them in order to make a new sentence that has the same structure as the one above. Okay? Take like 20 seconds and try to figure that out for yourself. All right, so if we look first, we have the Magi, so we have our subject. Here, our subject is going to be last summer. Last summer, of course, was the warmest summer that has ever occurred in the North. All right, so we took those 4 pieces and we reorganized them to have our subject. And then we know this has to be set off by commas. As you know, of course, kind of have the same meaning. And then we have what happened to it. It was the warmest summer. And then we have our restrictive clause that has ever occurred in the North. All right. So now you're going to take this a little bit more on your own. And I want you to use this example and create your own. Okay. So you have the strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded. So we have our subject, our restrictive clause, what happens to it, or that. All right, so take another 20, 30 seconds and try to follow this pattern to make your own sentence. All right. So an example you might come up with, we have our subject. So maybe the book of poetry that sat underneath my desk was special because it included my favorite poem and my mom bought it for me. Okay, so again we have our subject, then our restrictive clause, what happened to it, and then we have a fanboy over here and another option. Alright, so the book of poetry that sat underneath my desk was special because it included my favorite poem and my mom bought it for me. Alright, now finally I want you to go ahead and expand this. So we have the suspect in the lineup committed the crime. Okay? And what you're going to do is expand this. So you're going to add a restrictive clause to the sentence in order to give necessary information about the suspect. Now remember, the restrictive clause's purpose is to identify which one, to help specify who we're talking about. So if you have a lineup of suspects, then somebody's going to have to know what they look like or how to identify them in order to pick the correct one. So go ahead and take a couple seconds and add your own restrictive clause. Just to start you off, of the words that we know, it's either going to be who, that, or which. And who refers back to a person, and our suspect is a person, so that's what you're going to start off with. The suspect in the lineup who, blah, 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 committed the crime. Who maybe was the tallest committed the crime. Or you could say who was wearing a blue shirt. Or you could pick anything you want, but you need one restrictive clause that's going to help identify who the suspect is that committed the crime. All right. Then finally, let's do a multiple choice question. I want you to identify which of the following does not include a restrictive clause. Now the trick is there are 3 of these that have a restrictive clause and 1 of these that only has a non-restrictive clause. So remembering the difference between them, identify which one does not have a restrictive clause. A, the suspect in the lineup who has red hair committed the crime. B, the store honored the complaints, which were less than 60 days old. C, the boat that sailed on October 25th is the one to which we referred in the contract. Or D, the credit card that I borrowed from a friend is in my wallet. Right here, we have a restrictive clause. Who has red hair. It's not set off by commas, so it's restrictive. Here, which were less than 60 days old, it has comma. So we know that this one has to be non-restrictive. So B would be your correct answer. If you want to go a little further, which we referred in this contract, also not set off by a comma, and that I borrowed from a friend, also not set off. So those would also be restrictive clauses. All right, thanks. All right, the next thing that we are going to do is read this story, Pyramus and Thisbe, in your textbooks. That should be page 946. So go ahead and open your textbooks to 946. It's originally by Ovid, a Roman poet from forever, ever ago, And then this version is retold by Edith Hamilton. All right, so if you look over at 947, this is where the story starts. I'm going to actually read it for you, and I just want you to follow along. I really want you to focus on what is the theme of the passage, because when we get done, we're going to be comparing theme between this story and the poem that we read last class. And I just want you to have a good idea of what is the theme of this one, okay? What is the main message? Here we go. Background. The tale of Pyramus and Thisbe appears in Book 4 of Metamorphoses, Ovid's greatest achievement, a poem of nearly 12,000 lines. It tells a series of stories beginning with the creation of the world and ending with the death of Julius Caesar. In each story, someone or something undergoes a change. Divided into 15 books, the stories are linked by clever transitions so that the entire work reads as one long, uninterrupted tale. Once upon a time, the deep red berries of the mulberry tree were white as snow. The change in color came about strangely and sadly. The death of 2 young lovers was the cause. Pyramus and Thisbe, he the most beautiful youth and she the loveliest maiden of all the East, lived in Babylon, the city of Queen Semiramis, in houses so close together that one wall was common to both. Growing up thus side by side, they learned to love each other. They longed to marry, but their parents forbade. Love, however, cannot be forbidden. The more that flame is covered up, the hotter it burns. Also, love can always find a way. It was impossible that these 2 whose hearts were on fire should be kept apart. In the wall both houses shared there was a little chink. No one before had noticed it, but there is nothing a lover does not notice. Our 2 young people discovered it, and through it they were able to whisper sweetly back and forth, Thisbe on one side, Pyramus on the other. The hateful wall that separated them had become their means of reaching each other. But for you we could touch, kiss, they would say, but at least you let us speak together. You give a passage for loving words to reach loving ears. We are not ungrateful. So they would talk, and as night came on, and they must part, each would press on the wall kisses that could not go through to the lips on the other side. Every morning, when the dawn had put out the stars, and the sun's rays had dried the hoarfrost on the grass, they would steal to the crack, and standing there, now utter words of burning love, and now lament their hard fate, but always in softest whispers. Finally, a day came when they could endure no longer. They decided that very night they would try to slip away and steal out through the city into the open country where at last they could be together in freedom. They agreed to meet at a well-known place, the tomb of Ninus. Under a tree there, a tall mulberry full of snow-white berries, near which a cool spring bubbled up. The plan pleased them, and it seemed to them the day would never end. At last the sun sank into the sea, and night arose. In the darkness Thisbe crept out and made her way in all secrecy to the tomb. Pyramus had not come, still she waited for him, her love making her bold. But of a sudden she saw by the light of the moon a lioness. The fierce beast had made a kill. Her jaws were bloody, and she was coming to shake her thirst in the spring. She was still far enough away for Thisbe to escape, but as she fled she dropped her cloak. The lioness came upon it on her way back to her lair, and she mouthed it and tore it before disappearing into the woods. That is what Pyramus saw when he appeared a few minutes later. Before him lay the blood-stained shreds of the cloak, and clear in the dust were the tracks of the lioness. The conclusion was inevitable. He never doubted that he knew all. Thisbe was dead. He had let his love, a tender maiden, come alone to a place full of danger, and not been there first to protect her. "It is I who killed you," he said. He lifted up from the trampled dust what was left of the cloak, and kissing it again and again carried it to the mulberry tree. "Now," he said, "you shall drink my blood too." He drew his sword and plunged it into his side. The blood spurted up over the berries and dyed them a dark red. Thisbe, although terrified of the lioness, was still more afraid to fail her lover. She ventured to go back to the tree of the tryst, the mulberry with the shining white fruit. She could not find it. A tree was there, but not one gleam of white was on the branches. As she stared at it, something moved on the ground beneath. She started back, shuddering, but in a moment, peering through the shadows, she saw what was there. It was Pyramus, bathed in blood and dying. She flew to him and threw her arms around him. She kissed his cold lips and begged him to look at her, to speak to her. "It is I, your Thisbe, your dearest," she cried to him. At the sound of her name, he opened his eyes for one look. Then death closed them. She saw his sword fallen from his hand, and beside it her cloak, stained and torn. She understood all. "Your own hand killed you," she said, "and your love for me. I too can be brave. I too can love. Only death would have had the power to separate us. It shall not have that power now." She plunged into her heart the sword that was still wet with his life's blood. The gods were pitiful at the end, and the lovers' parents too. The deep red fruit of the mulberry is the everlasting memorial of these true lovers, and one urn holds the ashes of the two whom not even death could part. Alright, so now that we've read Pyramus and Thisbe, the next thing that we are going to do is do a quick review of our crossover short answers. I know we haven't done those in a while. We've done several of the single response short answers where we're just talking about one story. This is going to be a crossover short answer. So if you remember, a while back we took these notes and I made you draw cliffs and everybody loved it so much. And this is in your reader's mini lessons. That'll be your first book, second tab. Okay? You should have crossover short answer. If you are new to my class or you can't find these notes, make sure you take them really quick again. Okay? So a crossover is a compare and contrast short answer. Make sure that you have that you know that. There are two kinds you can run into. The first one is if you're comparing or contrasting and you're finding a similarity. Okay? So what do these have in common? Something like that. In which case you have story 1 over here and story 2 over here. And you're going to have an answer and a reason. Your AR is your bridge. It connects both of them. So you answer the question, restate the question, you give your because, and it's going to connect to both. Then you give a quote and explain for one side, one story, and then you give me a quote and explain for the other story. Then, if we're looking at a difference and you're contrasting them, you're going to have your answer, reason, quote, and explain for story 1, and your answer, reason, quote, and explain for story 2. So it's basically like two short answers squished into one. All right. Obviously, we know that you aren't going to be able to get quite as much explanation into a crossover short answer for each story because you have more information to include in that same little box. But you still do need to try to include as much insightful information as you can about the questions. All right. So when you came in today, you picked up a paper that had two crossovers on it. The first one is a crossover with Bright Star. And so that's the poem that we read last class. And I need you to do this crossover. And then the second one is a crossover with Romeo and Juliet. So if you want to, go ahead and get started. Remember, it's either going to be a similarity where you have answer, reason, quote, explain, ARQE, QE. Or it's going to be a difference where you have answer, reason, quote, explain, answer, reason, quote, explain. Okay? So go ahead and begin on these two short answers. I will give you about 20 minutes to do them. I need you to do your absolute best. All right? And then the remainder of the time, we're going to do some Romeo and Juliet review. And if you get this done efficiently and well, you might even have some time to begin watching the Romeo and Juliet movie. All right? Pause here. Okay, so you should be done with the crossovers for Bright Star and Romeo and Juliet, comparing them to Pyramus and Thisbe or contrasting them. Now, I just want you to draw your attention to the choice that you picked up on your way inside. The choice is your homework assignment. Write on it, due Thursday. Okay, just because I'm not here doesn't mean that you have an excuse, okay? So make sure that the choice, it's due Thursday, you have to get it done. On the front side, there are 3 multiple choice questions. It should be pretty simple, but I do want you to think about them, especially the author's purpose, not just what does it say, but why would the author include these things, okay? I do expect you to use what you know from TPCast. If there are any words in this poem that you don't know, they need to be defined off to the side. If there's any difficult line, You should paraphrase that so that you're sure you understand what it's talking about. Look for connotation, imagery, attitude, shifts, all of that, okay? So I need to have a few clear notes that you've taken on the poem to show that you've really dug into it and studied it. I need you to have all 3 of those multiple choice questions answered, and then on the back there is a short answer response that you need to do for that poem, okay? All right, next thing is you should have a front and back paper that is Romeo and Juliet Act 1 and Act 2 close activity. And basically what it is it gives you a summary of what's happened in the story so far, because we've read the first 2 acts. And as you watch the movie, I'll give you the opportunity to go ahead and fill that out for me. And you need to have that completed by the time you get back next class. Actually, go ahead and complete it and turn it in before you leave class today. So make sure before you leave my classroom, you need to turn that into the drawer. And then when you come back on Thursday, you need to have the choice poetry homework completed. All right, awesome. I look forward to seeing you guys on Thursday. I know it's been a little while, so have a good one. I'll see you then.